It's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.
Good morning. Indeed it is. How are you all? I hope you are well. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Wake Up. It is Monday, the 9th of February. It's just gone 1 minute past 9. GMT. I can hear myself coming back at me on the YouTube. Stop. How are you all? How are you all? I hope you're very well. Red Pilled Fox can't stay too long. Boss is lurking nearby. Ooh, morning all, Aliv. Morning, Robert and Stephen and Havanstran. I think Stratton. Havanstratton. I think I've got that right. Vanessa and Peter and SMG and all of you wonderful people. How are you? And Woody and Catherine and Drumstick and King and Sally Ann and Health Freedom UK and DJ Markison and Peter Folder. Welcome to the show that knows. If opportunity doesn't knock, you know what you need to do. Just build a sodding door. That's right. Thank you. That was Milton Berle. And how are you today? I hope you are well. This is Wake Up, the show that pulls no punches. I'm journalist and broadcaster Sonia Poulton. And on today's show, I will be joined by journalist Warren Thornton. He'll be talking all manner of things, including Starmer and Labour and Mandelson and Iran and the Labour Party and Israel and you name it. Yes, indeed. I'll also be joined by activist and writer SANDI Adams. She'll be talking to me about 2030 alternative media, the fate of British farmers, and how they have been systematically let down. I'll also be joined from South Africa by Norman from 9/11 Revisionist, and also from the US by Patricia, who is a 9/11 widow, will be joining us. And both of them will be explaining to people why we cannot afford to let it lie. We cannot afford to let the official narrative of 9/11 continue on. No, we can't. So I hope you are well. Let me just adjust myself here. I think that's about right. And what else is coming up? Ghislaine Maxwell is testifying today. I'll also be doing an update on the Noah Donohoe inquest. And also, what's the McCann's former spokesman up to? And Epstein files. Turns out I mentioned 4 times in them. And it turns out it's for the best reasons. Yes, I can assure you, truly it is. I'll also be reviewing the Lucy Letby Netflix documentary. Don't even get me started. And of course, we always wind off the show with your shout. And today we're going to be looking at eBay, psychotherapist John Hendon, the reprehensible Mermaids charity, one viewer's experience of quitting alcohol, what's going on at Substack, and do we have AI doctors on the horizon? And our final note goes to viewer Kerenza, who is feeling something of some despair that nothing will happen following the Epstein files release. And I hope to be able to share some tips that will stop us all feeling hopeless in the face of this scenario. And it is horrible, isn't it? It's like so much has come out and everybody's like, well, where's the arrest? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't actually work like that, of course, because first of all, you have to have somebody who testifies as a victim in order for there to be arrest. And I'm not sure yet that they've necessarily matched up the victims to the names. We know that some are, but also don't forget Victoria, who I think is one of the best, would have been one of the best possible witnesses for all of this. Virginia Giuffre, sadly, was said to have taken her life last April. So lots of confusing stuff coming out, but loads of events around it. And thank you for being here. Grand risings to you all. And hello, Kieran from the butchers. Kieran used to work at my butchers. I go in there regularly for bones for my dog. And Kieran is like us. He's awake. Yes, indeed, he is. How are you all? Good morning, Randy. Good morning to you all in the comments. You're not still talking about that Epstein bloke, are you? Says Sean. That sounds very Trumpish, Sean. Right, let's start with some news before we start bringing in our first guest. I want to talk about this young fella, Noah Donohoe update, the inquest into the death of 14-year-old Noah, currently ongoing at the Belfast Coroner's Court. Having concluded its 3rd week of evidence last week, the proceedings are now in a mid-term recess and are scheduled to resume on Monday, the 16th of February, 2026, so next Monday. Key updates from recent hearings include CCTV discrepancies. The court heard that critical CCTV footage from the Grove Leisure Centre was missed by police in the first 24 hours of the search. It was revealed that a time discrepancy on a private camera showing 1717 when the real time was actually 1801 may have led officers to incorrectly conclude that Noah was not on the footage. There's also been some very harrowing witness testimonies as well. We've heard from multiple witnesses who have reported hearing high-pitched or muffled human screams in the early hours following Noah's disappearance. There's also been strange noises. One resident reported hearing someone really, really loud trying her back door handle at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning on the night that Noah vanished. And one of the most heartbreaking testimonies actually came from the detective constable who testified about answering a call from Noah's mother. And the detective had Noah's mobile phone at this point. And Fiona had kept ringing and ringing, "Where's my son?" Any parent can imagine the panic that she would have gone through. And she kept ringing his number. And eventually it was answered by this detective constable who, difficult conversation, having to tell somebody, "No, Noah's not here. I'm a detective constable. We have his phone." Very difficult indeed. And there was a significant evidential development was noted regarding a domestic CCTV camera at 91 Northwood Road that captured Noah crossing a garden while naked and heading towards open ground. It's all heartbreaking stuff. Poor Fiona. She's been searching for answers since Noah disappeared in 2020. And she's just had to deal with so many obstacles. It's truly heartbreaking. I don't know how she's coping with this inquest, but we at Wake Up send her much love and much strength to keep going through this. And Stacey said, "I wish the titles would say what the topic is. It's impossible to look for missed videos." Stacey, that's not at all possible because I cover, I don't know, 20 topics in one show. Impossible. But what I am now doing, which may help you, Stacey, is I'm now putting on the thumbnails the titles of some of the topics. And also, don't forget, if you haven't realized, is we also have chapters. I do chapters at the end of each show so that you can break down very easily what's on each video, but it isn't possible to put it in the title, my darling. It really isn't. Sadly, but I take your point. Good morning to you all. I hope you're well. Sorry, I'm a bit late, says Gwyneth. Not at all. Last week, Parliament approved regulations to designate UK life sciences facilities, including animal research sites, as key national infrastructure, allowing police to use stricter powers against protests at these locations. This, of course, will cover, for example, MBR Acres in Cambridge, which is an industrial facility where they are breeding beagles on industrial scale to be used in experimentation. Utterly vile stuff. And one of the key people involved, I'm sure you'll recognize him, is this man. Patrick Vallance, a very dangerous man indeed. Lord Patrick Vallance was appointed Minister for Science in July 2024. He previously served as the UK's government chief scientific advisor during the C19 period. And in his role as Minister of State for Science, Research and Innovation, he's been associated with these recent discussions, as you can imagine. And he's involved in the government's approach to this, and which includes strengthening protections around these sites against interference. They hate animals, these people. And Labour particularly remiss in this because Labour has promised so much, and so has Patrick Vallance. In fact, in November last year, they promised that animal testing would be phased out faster as UK unveils roadmap for alternative methods. And yet, at the same time, these very deceptive people are ensuring that protesters cannot protest outside these facilities. Really awful stuff. On the one hand, they're like, we're opposed to animal testing, and on the other, we won't allow people to protest against animal testing. Awful stuff. Now, they are saying that AI should help them to analyze huge amounts of information to predict whether new medicines will be safe and work well on humans. They're seeing that as a potential alternative. The reality is, and this has been proven over and over again now over decades, is that you cannot test on animals to see how something will work on humans. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And by 2027, researchers are expected, they say, to end tests of the strength of Botox on mice and to use only DNA-based lab methods for agent testing of human medicines. Well, we shall see. And either way, Labour, as I say, is failing animals like it's failing the rest of us, frankly. Patrick Vallance is absolutely a problem, a man with corporate history and incentives with a huge stake in what happens in our government and in our health. I worked with a man who is, Patrick Vallance is his brother-in-law. The guy was great, actually a reporter at TNT. Guy was great, lovely. And we cannot blame for people for who their families have married into, whatever. But Patrick Vallance, a very dangerous man indeed. Randy said, let them test their own chemicals. Indeed. I agree with you, Randy. And talking about problematic people. This is one Clarence Mitchell. And he is now, he's a former leader of Reading Tories. He's now defected to Reform UK. We're so shocked. And Clarence Mitchell has systematically failed to be voted into Parliament. In fact, I doorstepped him when he was up against the Green Party in Brighton, and I asked him questions to do with this case. Of course, as I say, he's a former spokesperson for Kate and Jerry McCann, probably still is, probably still gets wheeled out if they need him. But this is obviously very problematic. But perhaps now Reform can start answering questions, because Clarence Mitchell, perhaps more than most people, have pushed the abduction narrative, which has actually cost the UK in excess of £14 million. Well, surely Reform is now going to answer why one of their highest profile people has been pushing an abduction narrative where there's no evidence that Madeleine McCann was abducted. And I also wonder, because Colin Sutton, the cop who features in my documentaries to do with the McCanns, Colin Sutton, former senior cop in the Metropolitan Police, was at one stage rumoured to be heading up Operation Grange, the British investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. And he ended up not doing it because he was warned off. He was told that he wouldn't be able to question the parents or those involved, which is kind of wild, isn't it, for a police investigation? So I'd be really interested to be a fly on the wall in any conversations to do with Clarence Mitchell and Colin Sutton. But yeah, I think we can start asking Reform now. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about Operation Grange? 14 million plus. Reform, aren't they supposed to be a people party? Because the British investigation into Madeleine McCann is as far away from a people agenda as you're likely to get. So no surprises there, says Jeannie. It's a big club, bro, says Sail Away. Indeed, it is. It is a big club. And public donated money. Yes, Kira. Yes, indeed. I think I'm going to bring in Warren any second, because I want to crack on with him about, well, so much. But before I do get there, I just want to briefly mention this. This is me. This is from an interview I did with Andrew Gold in 2024. And this is in the Epstein files. In fact, I am featured 4 times in the Epstein files, technically, but actually, really in reality, in truth, only twice, because they've repeated documents. And thankfully, I've repeatedly said any mention in the so-called Epstein files does not automatically mean wrongdoing. And I'm actually delighted to be in them. And I believe that I'm in there for all the right reasons, and all the right reasons, meaning that I'm in a file which is potentially beset with predators, traffickers, pedophiles, you name it, and I'm calling them out. They lied to you about Andrew Epstein and the BBC, and the other mention of me was at the hands of George Tonks. I don't know if you've heard of George Tonks. George Tonks, I believe, is a survivor, and he's actually said the reference to him is about shady dealings going on behind the scenes, and that I am a respected reporter who is aware of what he's going through and should be contacted. So that is interesting stuff. They were scared of you, Sonia. Well, I like to hear that. Best they know who I am, right, kids? Best they know who I am. I mean, I think too many people hide what they're about and who they are, but not me. Not me. I'm a predator detector, and you better know it. Oh, yes, Nikki. Yes, indeed, my love. Yes, indeed. So I'm glad about that. I'm happy about that. And isn't it weird, that whole thing? I don't know if you saw that came out about a federal statement announcing Jeffrey Epstein's death actually was dated the day before. We were told that he died on August the 10th, but this is dated August the 9th. What to make of any of this, people? Well, let's find out. Let's invite our friend, lovely Warren Thornton, in. I'm sure he's going to help me work through it. Let's do this. Good morning, Warren Thornton. How are you, my love?
Good morning, Sonia. I am absolutely fine, and good morning to everybody who's watching the show.
Wonderful to have you with us, Warren. There's so much going on. I think it would be remiss not really to start with Epstein, because that's impacting the British government so much, isn't it, at the moment? So let's bring in these images. First of all, this is, of course, Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, with Morgan McSweeney, his former chief of staff. Then, of course, there is Peter Mandelson and Keir Starmer again. What do you want to say about all these characters on the screen, Warren?
Well, it is quite funny that they're trying to blame Russia in some way for Mandelson being some sort of Russian spy, when, of course, we all know where the blame really lies. And, of course, these people will over and over again try and push this narrative. It's failed miserably. And, of course, the fallout from this is quite incredible. And when we talk about Epstein, his girlfriend was the daughter of a Mossad agent. One of his best friends was Israel's lawyer. Another of his best friends was a former Israeli prime minister. He met with the current Israeli prime minister. A senior Israeli spy stayed at his house for weeks at a time. A friend invited him to bring his girls to Israel. That's in the Epstein files. He fled to Israel when he was charged with sex crimes against a minor. He's been pictured wearing an IDF shirt. He was funded by pro-Israeli fanatics. He worked for the Rothschilds, donated to pro-Israel groups, responsible for Les Wexner's pro-Israel philanthropy. He supported Israel's settlement projects. Friends were all Zionists, scathingly referred to non-Jews as Goyim. He was involved in Israeli diplomatic efforts. He brokered security deals for Israel, aimed to profit from regime changes in the Middle East. And a former Israeli intelligence officer said he ran a honeypot for Israel. His business partner confirmed he ran a honeypot for Israel. And one of his victims confirmed that he ran a honeypot for Israel. So definitely a Russian spy then, Sonia.
That's an extraordinary amount of links going on. And of course, Morgan McSweeney, also very much pro-Israel, pushing the Zionist agenda. We know that. Yes. So what has happened to Morgan McSweeney? Has he taken the fall for Keir Starmer? Because he said, no, I was very much involved in the appointment of Peter Mandelson as US ambassador. Peter Mandelson, of course, has now quit from the House of Lords, resigned from Labour. Not a moment too soon. Didn't want to, of course, done his usual Mandelson thing. He does a very quick dance, really good on spin. But what are we to make of Morgan McSweeney?
Well, Morgan McSweeney is a Mandelson acolyte. He always has been. And of course, he was the power behind the throne and the kingmaker, if you like. And they've thrown him under the bus. I mean, you only have to look, of course, with the links that he has with Mandelson, and of course, Mandelson's links with Epstein, and of course, the prime ministers of Israel and everything else. And you have to remember that the amendment to stop us from hearing anything that the Prime Minister put forward onto, obviously, the Commons, which rejected it, had Darren Jones, Nick Thomas Simmons and Jonathan Reynolds backing it. And they, of course, are all members of Labour Friends of Israel.
And Benjamin Netanyahu came out and said Jeffrey Epstein's unusual close relationship with Ehud Barak doesn't suggest Epstein worked for Israel. It proves the opposite. I'm not convinced it proves the opposite. And clearly all the links Warren has just demonstrated shows that. It's very disturbing, the whole thing. Of course, you also pointed out to me that this woman and Mandelson, who is this woman?
This is, of course, Morgan McSweeney's wife, would you believe? Yes, and of course, Peter Mandelson ran her campaign for her when she stood. This is something that her name is Imogen Walker, and she is McSweeney's wife. And she received donations from lobbyist Gary Loebner and McSweeney's Labour Together campaign, which, of course, many of those, the LFI, Jacob Rothschild was very much into as well. Wes Streeting, who is being targeted and says that he's going to be the next prime minister. Of course, he didn't know Mandelson at all, but of course he campaigned with him in 2015 and 2019. So that's a complete load of nonsense as well. And the ties go everywhere. The former LFI chairman, Jonathan Woodcock, described Mandelson's appointment as an inspired choice. He then resigned from the Labour Party while being investigated for sexual harassment. He was funded by serial Israel lobbyist Trevor Chin and John Mandelson. And then in 2022, Woodstock is hired by Peter Thiel's Palantir.
Oh, good Lord. It is so connected. This, of course, we saw these images, I think, last week when they were removing evidence from Mandelson's home. This is Mandelson's home, right?
No, it actually isn't. It's a rented home, and it's rented from Nathaniel Rothschild.
Is this Nathaniel?
It is, yes.
I see. Interesting. So the links and the ties obviously are absolutely everywhere. Is this going to bring Starmer down?
I think it has to. I mean, there is so much to see here, and I don't think people are going to let it go very much. Everybody is now like a dog with a bone when it comes to the elites and some of their appalling behavior that is shown in the Epstein files. And there are three other things you have to take into consideration, Sonia, is first of all, the walls are circling. Angela Rayner, obviously, Miliband, who is closest to the Green Party, so they might think they can garner some votes there. We've got a by-election coming up. The Green Party are neck and neck with Labour. If it's a bad result, Starmer's then got to try and get over that hurdle. Remember, in April, he's got to explain his ties to the three Ukrainian young male models who all worked at one time or another for the Ukrainian for the Ukrainian agency that Peter Mandelson was using to bring girls and boys to his island. So there is that link there as well.
Peter Mandelson was using, did you just say? Do you mean Epstein?
Epstein, sorry.
Yeah. We don't need a defamation lawsuit. No, it's all right. No, there's enough on Mandelson as it is. Don't worry, I get it. So it is interesting stuff, obviously. The whole Epstein thing, do you feel it's a distraction or what is it? What's going on there?
There's plenty to see here. The distraction is trying to say, look, there is nothing more to see. We've had that, haven't we, from these so-called journalists who are not like me and you. They do very little work, and we've got people like Dan Bongino, we've got people like Kash Patel, who have all turned around and say there's nothing more to see here. Well, if there's nothing to see, Sonia, why are heads of state all around the world and very influential people in various governments around the world all suddenly resigning, as well as CEOs of major companies and corporations?
What about this man's role? Where does he fit into all of this?
Well, Donald Trump here has obviously turned around and said, look, we've got to make sure that the files are out there. And he told Pam Bondi to actually do that. Now, Pam Bondi said that all the files were on her desk. And of course, he is the one who instructs. And of course, if Israel have got anything, if they have anything against Donald Trump, then they're going to use that in negotiations when Netanyahu goes to see Trump on Tuesday. And so he's in between a rock and a hard place. He's literally received 200 million from, obviously, from Miriam, the big Israeli sponsor, of course. And of course, the ties and the links to Israel are incredible, with Witkoff, Kushner, Rubio have all been, shall we say, to the wall and pledged their allegiance. Susie Wiles as well was part of the AIPAC lobby and everything else. So it's sort of surrounded on all sides, and there is much more to see here, including all the documents we've yet to see. And of course, we've got Thomas Massey pushing for the full unredacted files to be out there.
And we need the unredacted files, because when you see emails such as like somebody sending a picture of a 10-year-old, but we can't see the name of who sent it, we absolutely need to see that, don't we? Unquestionably. And the other thing, Warren, is the volume of Brits that Epstein seemed to like, right? So he liked Nigel Farage, he liked Tommy Robinson. He was watching Tommy Robinson closely to do with his contempt of court issue, as one example. Epstein, of course, absolutely behind the British far right and the MAGA movement, no doubt about it. And what are your thoughts about that, the Brits brought into this?
Yeah, I mean, when you go through the Epstein files, there's a list out there that which is very nicely compiled by a friend of mine, and he went through literally listing all the countries that are out there. And after America, Britain are the next biggest mentioned in the Epstein files, absolutely thousands of times. And of course, many people that are wrapped up in this. And of course, many people are coming out and saying, oh, there's nothing to see here. You have to remember, of course, that every single person who's in the running to take over from Keir Starmer voted against a grooming gang inquiry. And of course, this all looks really bad. And you have to say, Sonia, when it comes to America, the likes of Pam Bondi belong in jail, because they're turning around and saying there is no evidence that anybody tracked anybody to anybody. If that's the case, why is Ghislaine Maxwell in jail? Why did Epstein supposedly kill himself? And of course, we've got to answer why that document came out showing that Epstein was dead a day before he actually died. So there's much to answer here.
There really is. And also, we also need to look at what's happened with social media, the kind of Twitter takeover by Elon Musk, who spent almost all of last week deflecting any involvement himself. But we in London are not having it. Did you see this bus shelter? Here it is. This is one of Elon Musk's emails. This is close to the Tesla factory in North London, and it was sent on Christmas Day in the early hours of the morning from Elon Musk to Jeffrey Epstein, and it was saying, what day night will be the wildest party on your island? And Elon Musk has done everything he can to deflect. Of course, X now is just, it's a former shadow of itself. But what about his role? Does he have any kind of true involvement, do you think, Warren?
Well, I think they all do, because you have to remember that there is a photograph in the Epstein files that shows them having a meeting with photographs taken by this Chandler woman, that shows Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and of course Mark Zuckerberg. So all these tech people taking part in meetings. So there has to be transparency and clear. Shall we say, everybody needs to be called in front of this oversight committee. This is a thing, as Pam Bondi has said, if we prosecuted everybody, it would bring down governments. Well, that's your job. Right. And your job is not to turn around and tell people there is nothing to see here, when there quite clearly shows that children have been trafficked, not just young girls from modelling agencies, but trafficking to other people. And they're not redacting the names of the victims. They're redacting the names of the people who are communicating with Epstein. So this is an absolute disgrace, and these people should be impeached as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. So I just want to turn my attention, or rather your attention, to other world news that's taking place. There's the Iran negotiations. They've resumed, haven't they, in Oman? Why are you laughing? Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because Iran have pulled a masterstroke. So basically what happened, we cut through all the nonsense. Trump was saying Iran were desperate to make a deal. No, they weren't. Israel were pushing the agenda for America. And America, of course, said it's going to be in Istanbul. Iran turned around and said Oman. And of course, America went, no, that's not happening. And Iran went, OK, we're not having any discussions then. And then they tried to set the agenda. They wanted Iran not to back anyone in future, to get rid of every single missile, which included ballistic ones, to be able to protect themselves against Israel or any strikes, and of course to get rid of zero uranium enrichment, and to get rid of any nuclear program. And Iran just turned around and said, we'll talk about the level of enrichment, nothing else. And America said, well, in that case, then we will use military action. And Iran said, go ahead, we're ready for you this time. And of course, when they turned around and said, OK, there'll be no discussions, Iran turned around and said, OK, no discussions. And the other thing, Sonia, was they were meant to have a general from the obviously CENTCOM in those discussions. And Iran turned around and said, if he comes along, as far as we're concerned, that's a veiled threat. If you bring him, we are not going to be having any talks whatsoever. So Iran got plenty of victories there.
So we're being told that Iran is insisting that the talks focus exclusively on the nuclear program. But is that really true, or is that just what they're pushing out to us?
No, Iran have turned around and said, we're not discussing missiles. We're not discussing anything else. We will talk about the percentage of enrichment. We are not getting rid of our nuclear program. We're not getting rid of our ballistic missiles.
And I understand that this week, I think Benjamin Netanyahu is heading off to the White House again for a meeting with Trump. Again, you're smiling. What's going on? Tell me, what is going on?
Well, Israel are pretty desperate to get this thing underway. I mean, their sort of dream is to have a war between the US and Iran. And of course, the major problem that they have with this is Israel have been pushing for these strikes, and Donald Trump has gone, we're going to hit you. And he's got all his boats and everything else already. And Iran have said, we will shut down the Straits of Hormuz. We will sink the USS Abraham Lincoln. And they are perfectly capable of doing that, by the way. We will shut down the Straits of Hormuz. That, of course, will push oil prices through the roof and, of course, cause an economic meltdown. And, of course, all the Arab states who have all been behind Trump here have suddenly had a bit of a meltdown themselves and contacted Trump and said, get round the table and talk. We can't have this because the price of oil will shoot through the roof. And, of course, the Russians are just sitting back and smiling because they know that their oil will be even more valuable.
Busy times. What are you working on this week, Warren?
Well, what we're working on this week is the fact that Iran are not going to be striking. And we're also keeping on following up with the Chinese because the Belt and Road Initiative, we've seen 28 Chinese engineers being killed by subversive groups. And, of course, we all know who they're sponsored by. And we'll be keeping an eye on the Zangezur corridor, which is that little strip of land at the top of northern Iran. And, of course, that's where the weapons came through for the first, shall we say, the first insurgents, or shall we say the first riots and everything else. And, of course, Besant will be keeping an eye on him because he shorted the currency of Iran to cause the protest in the first place. And then, of course, all the insurgents joined in on the protest and turned it violent.
Do you think Starmer is likely to be in place still by the end of the week?
It could be in place by the end of the week, but the problem is, who do you turn to? Miliband is a climate nutcase. Angela Rayner, let's put it, the haves are not having a have-not at the top of the pile. They're also
bit too working class, right? Bit too working
that's
class.
The one. As someone described it to me, there's too much of the council estate about her. Was the quote, which
sure
is very.
Say the same thing about me as well.
Yeah, me too. And of course, Wes Streeting is the favourite because he's been to the Bilderberg meetings this year. He's a good friend of Peter Thiel, so that would be the obvious replacement instead of Miliband, who is blowing in the wind, as they say.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. What a roundup this has been, everybody. This is Warren Thornton. You can catch him at warrenthornton.com every night, right, Warren?
Yes, every night, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And thank you once again for having me back and all your wonderful listeners.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for bringing the news. We truly appreciate it. Warren Thornton, everybody. Take good care of yourself. Lovely to have you with us.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful, 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 wonderful. And I want to just, before I welcome in my next guest, I want to read what Miss Jane says. What about our children? They have been subjected to the horrific grooming gangs. Don't our children count? Here in the UK, children are trafficked, shared, raped, drugged and killed. Oh, they absolutely count to me, Miss Jane, which is why I've been covering the issue of child abuse and trafficking for, well, actually probably close to 2 decades now. But I absolutely take your point. Last week, Rupert Lowe's grooming gang inquiry was hearing testimony from victims, obviously, of grooming gangs. Harrowing stuff. Unquestionably, I get you. And the problem, Miss Jane, in part is because it's so political. And there are politicians who have been involved in the cover up of the grooming gangs, which is why there's been this great reluctance to actually unpack what has really taken place. And certainly since it appears since the 80s. This is a long time, but I do take your point. And but I also think it's absolutely vital that we tackle and uncover what the links, the British links to what is going on in the UK to do with Epstein, because we then also start to understand that the people who have set themselves up as so-called child abuse campaigners are nothing of the sort. They are gatekeepers. Yes, indeed. Right. On that note, other than to acknowledge that King Charles was heckled on Thursday when he did a walkabout. He was in the Essex village of Dedham, and a man in the crowd wearing a grey hat and holding a blue umbrella shouted, Charles, have you pressurised the police to start investigating Andrew? And Charles didn't respond. And then the police officers approached the man afterwards, walked him away from the barriers, as you do. Charles also walked away. He continued to shake hands. But this is not going anywhere anytime soon. Camilla, Also ignored questions when she was asked at an event in Camden last week as well. She was visiting Christchurch Primary School in Camden, North London, to open its library. She was quizzed. She didn't answer. But the reality is media must hold these people to account. It's not okay that the king and the queen, as they're known, is kind of not answering, not taking accountability. But the reality is people are like, oh, Charles is doing the very best he can. He's being loyal to Andrew. Absolute baloney. The reality is, as I tweeted and put on social media yesterday, the reality is Charles has spent almost his entire life surrounded by predators and paedophiles. Perhaps the idea is it's better to be looking at Andrew than to be looking at Charles, according to the British establishment. But that might just be my take on it. Labour are done for, says Jay Walk. Same coat for 40 years, DJ Markson. Who are you talking about, Blossom? Right, I'm going to bring in my next guest. She's here and she's waiting to talk to us. Let's talk to her. Here she is. She's very lovely. SANDI Adams. How are you, SANDI?
I'm very well, Sonia, and thank you for having me today. It's really great to be back on. Thank you.
Lovely to have you with us. I'm sorry I'm a few minutes late. You can hear how hectic it is around here. So much to cover. You, of course, well, you're sort of lots of things. You're an incredible researcher to do with 2030, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You were part of the Agenda film with Oracle Films. That was great. Good stuff. I've interviewed them about it as well. You also do quite a lot of work in alternative media, and up to recently you were on UK Column, but you're not at UK Column anymore. Is that correct?
No, that's absolutely right. I left UK Column on the 12th of January to pursue my own work, really. I mean, I've always been a bit of a lone wolf, and I just felt that I needed to do my own thing. I've got to finish my book, which I put on hold really for a year. So yes, I'm not the sort of person to kind of be with, I just want to be on my own and do my own thing. Yeah.
Completely agree with you. People are always trying to get me involved in this and that. And after my last scenario at TNT, I was like, that's it. From now on, I'm going on my own. And I have not regretted it for a second, SANDI. Honestly, I'd highly recommend it to anybody who has something that they need to get out there. Go on your own, because it's a build it and they will come kind of world we're living in now. And we can do that. The internet allows us to do that. So you're also, I think, involved with this new publication, Propaganda, as well, aren't you?
Yes, I have a copy here, Propaganda, and I have a few articles in there, one of which is about the 17 goals, because I felt that people don't really know what they are. So I've written my interpretation of the 17 goals, because when you read them, they all sound wonderful, sugar-coated, fantastic, wonderful. But actually, there's a darkness behind them, as we always know. And I've written it in a sort of Tolkien-esque kind of way, because it's the 17 goals to rule them all and in the darkness bind them. So we're the little hobbits. At the moment, the Dark Lords are trying to gain control, and we, to understand what we're up against is key. Yeah,
it is key, and we're only 4 years away from their actual deadline. How well are they doing? I hear that they're struggling in some parts to achieve those goals.
I think they are. I mean, they've put them back several times, and I was quite pleased to see at Davos. They actually are talking about 2050 now, not 2030. So that was a bit of a win for us, I think. Yeah.
So they've been forced to put it back by 20 years because those blooming plebs, us people, we're just not complying, are we?
No.
I mean, I can't necessarily remember when you first kind of got into this kind of awake game and everything, but is it largely over the last 6 years to do with C19?
No, it was, I started this really in pre-2010 actually. But
wow.
It was about 2009 I really woke up, because I was working in the corporate world, and I happened to meet Bill Gates because I had to do an installation of a Microsoft installation. I was a set designer for live events and interior designer type thing, and I met him, and it was a mini smart city installation in Chelsea, and I thought, oh, this sounds a bit strange. And then I don't know why I got a bad feeling about it, and started really doing my research into what was then Agenda 21, and I read Rosa Corey's book Behind the Green Mask, and it all fitted in. I'd been a Green, and the whole thing, and I just started really researching Agenda 21, which then turned into 2030 and 2015, and then beyond that. Now it's the fourth industrial revolution and everything. So yeah, I suppose I've been on it a bit like you for about, well, for me it's about 17 years.
Yeah, it feels like a long journey when you've been on it that long,
Yeah.
because I mean, obviously we're battling against so much mis and disinformation. They have the money on their side. They use our taxpayers' money in order to have all their campaigns, their coercive propaganda campaigns. So we're battling against that. But the grassroots is really important, and we've also seen some charlatans and some shysters who have emerged, obviously, over the last few years, because in a situation like this, opportunists will always emerge. But I think ultimately the grassroots is what's carrying it. You're very much a grassroots person like myself. You also, of course, you talk about C40 cities or 15-minute cities, as people more commonly know them. C40 cities, many people really don't understand the impact that C40 cities, as one example, is actually having on our day-to-day life. But you do. Are we pushing back enough, do you think?
Well, I was a bit disheartened to find that the obviously Oxford are now, fully a 15-minute city now, and that has been a test really since just after lockdown. They implemented what they called the test bed, which was Oxford, Cambridge and Canterbury. There's a lot of pushback in Canterbury. There's a wonderful guy called Ben Fisher in Canterbury, and I was speaking to him the other day on a podcast, and they are pushing back in Canterbury because, again, I think they're trying to implement that as a permanent thing. And the more people realise that they can oppose it, because there hasn't been a proper consultation process. And it's funny, at the launch of Propaganda magazine the other evening, I had a wonderful person that asked me, what can we do? And I said, well, West London actually overcame a low traffic neighbourhood by taking the Lambeth Council to court on the bad consultation process. And that was really, it was under the gunning principles, which not many people know about. And if you're campaigning against a 15-minute city in LTN or whatever it might be solar panels, data centres, all the things that they're throwing at us, you can oppose them with the gunning principles, because it's a failure in consultation, and the only way they can implement it is through consultation. If they've screwed that up, it can be reverse engineered. And in West Dulwich, they took it to court, they won. Lambeth Council had to pay their court costs. All the number plate recognition surveillance cameras had to be taken down. Everything had to be taken down. Wow. Everybody was refunded their penalties. And so, there are things you can do. And also they had to pay the court costs, Lambeth did. So it can be done. It can be taken out.
It can be done. You just have to need to know what it is you're doing. So that's the gunning principle, and that is a failure in consultation, right? That's what you're
gunning
saying.
Principles. Look them up. You can use them. They are the people's, key to getting rid of some of this. Yeah.
So that is the thing. It's obviously that old adage, isn't it? Knowledge is power. We just need to know how we should fight back against these people. And it feels like, the conversation I want to have with you is really about kind of all round about what's taking place, which we've obviously already started that as well. But it feels like an absolute attack on us from every angle, and not least our food. And you've done a lot of work to do with farmers. And in fact, this morning you tried to send me through the coat of arms of the National Farmers Union. It wouldn't let me, but you said, and I thought it was interesting, the farmers lost all faith with the NFU, so that's obviously the National Farmers Union. They're no effing use. The motto at the bottom translates to, may the state flourish through the farmers' toil. And you talk obviously about them being a Marxist organisation. So the union that's supposed to represent the farmers is failing them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been following the farmers' protests for a long time.
Yeah,
and they've had a lot of problems. They've had infiltration. They've had all sorts of things to derail their cause. And I deal with the real farmers. The ones literally boots on the ground, lovely farmers, and their voice isn't really being heard. And so I have been following them, and I've been down at some of the protests. And the NFU have not helped them at all. The NFU have been really in consultation with the government, also in consultation with the supermarkets too. Is that the supermarkets are literally a cartel against the farmers and with the pricing. And the farmers are up against so much. They've had the sustainable farming incentive, which actually is defunding them until 2027, unless they have to prove that they are following the sustainable development goals and not growing food, basically. So they're almost being incentivized not to grow food, which sounds backward thinking, and it is. And all of this is really because the idea is to bring on these state super farms. But what they've realized with the NFU is they're getting no support at all. And when they looked into, when it was brought about in 1946, I think, and there is a whole article on it, which I haven't had time to share with you, but it really is a state, almost a Marxist communist organization. It was very, 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 very left wing. And the motto says it all: may the state flourish through the farmers' toil, which is unbelievable, really. And that's proven at the moment. Yeah, they're not, the farmers call them NFU, no effing use.
Absolutely, and it would appear to be the case. So what is happening in terms of the farmers? Because last year, huge amount of activism took place, tractors outside Parliament, all manner of things. What's happening now? Because these are those situations where you just can't afford to let up. Because obviously, as you say, the farmers are being given money for sustainability programs and rewilding and all these different things, and essentially incentivized not to grow food, which is the most bizarre scenario possible. So obviously, this is destroying people's livelihoods, their practices. So what are farmers actually doing?
Well, they've been through a process themselves, because a lot of farmers weren't as awake. Bless them. They worked very hard in the fields, providing our food for us, and they understood what happened. Obviously lockdown for them. A lot of them went along with it. A lot of them went along with the whole climate change thing because, they thought they were saving the planet by adhering to all this stuff. They're just beginning to really see, smell the coffee, wake up and smell the coffee. So bless them. It's been a process. And at the first, on the first protests, there was a lot of controlled, I hate to say it, but controlled opposition kind of going in there and messing things up. And I think they've now realised that that the only way they can protest is keep secret about what they're doing and do it themselves. And I totally agree with them on that one, because when we went to London on the 26th of November, I was there. It was budget day, and the farmers brought in their tractors. They had negotiated with the government and the Met Police. They were allowed to bring their tractors into Whitehall to do a protest because they wanted Rachel Reeves to stop, at least do something about the inheritance tax. And they're literally 5 o'clock the afternoon before. It takes a long time to get a tractor from Cornwall to London. They'd all gathered in London and they were told they couldn't bring their tractors into Whitehall. They pulled the rug from right underneath them. So they parked their tractors. They were told to park their tractors elsewhere, Trafalgar Square, Pall Mall, wherever. And the Met Police turned on them and impounded their vehicles, and they had to pay $2,500 to recover their tractors. And it was just the worst thing that could have happened to them. And they realised that the NFU, the government, the police, none of them are on their side. Nobody is going to help them. So they're helping themselves now. Now, what's happening, and you're probably not hearing it in the mainstream media. I'm covering as much as I can. I was down at Portbury Docks a couple of weeks ago, where they blockaded the docks because they had an idea that, they knew that inferior imports were coming in, and they wanted to state, their kind of position on that one. And they're doing these flash protests to disrupt the food chain. Now, that could upset a lot of people because they want to prove to the supermarkets that the farmers are in trouble and that they shouldn't be locked out of all the deals, which they are. The supermarkets are literally pricing the farmers out and not giving them what they need. So what they're doing is they're also having these flash protests at distribution centres all over England, and you won't know when they're coming. They're doing it literally. They're like flash protests, and that's the way they're doing it. They're keeping it very secret. I will be their voice for them. I will be, telling people what is going on. But what they don't want is the supermarkets turning on the farmers and saying the reason why the shelves are empty is because of the farmers. It's not. It's because of their behavior towards the farmers, and the farmers need to make a statement. So that's what they're doing.
Thank you for clarifying that. It's so important because we hear a lot of propaganda. When they were doing a lot of the farming protests last year, we were hearing so much, weren't we, about inheritance tax and how it's really wealthy people that we're fighting on behalf of here. But that was a lot, wasn't it, that we were told about? And like you say, a lot of these people, they're passing on their farms from generation to generation. They're toiling the land quite literally. And they're not, the vast majority are not wealthy landowners, are they?
Absolutely not. Most farmers I know, it's all tied up in generational stuff. It's in buildings, equipment, everything. They are cash poor, absolutely cash poor, and they are struggling. They're really struggling. And as you say, these farms used to go down in generations. Now there's a reason why they've stopped the whole inheritance thing. The inheritance tax is to prevent them from passing their property and everything else and the money down through the generations, because what the government really want are these corporate-owned super farms, and what they have in mind is that farmers, instead of passing down their farms to their sons and daughters, they have to go to a university. They're now trying to make it that to be a farmer you have to go to university and learn the whole tech stuff, robotics, science, and take it out of nature and back into the laboratory, if you like. And this is what the ultimate aim is to have these massive indoor corporate-owned supermarkets, not supermarkets, but farms, so that the supermarkets can control the growing and everything. If you look at the Sainsbury's Future of Food report, do look it up. It's got a plan for supermarket, well, particularly Sainsbury's, from 2025 to 2169. That's about 150 years of phasing out all the meat, dairy, and a lot of the crops, and using labs to create 3D printed meat, insect biomass, crickets and all that kind of stuff, jellyfish suppers. Horrible stuff. Look at it. It's absolutely dystopian. And that is what they intend to do. This is why they're destroying British farming.
It's astonishing stuff. You are a mine of information, which is always wonderful. Carol says, love SANDI. I've been listening to her for years now, and she was warning all about this back then. Yes, indeed. Mel's is being hopeful. I have faith that our consciousness will come through and thwart their plans. And Jan said, Gates has been made to do a U-turn. He said in Gates' notes that global warming will not kill people. I mean, bit by bit, they're kind of forced to a certain degree, aren't they, to backtrack. But SANDI, I want to ask you about this, and that is the sense of hopelessness that people feel, because your information is so valuable and so important, but in its own way. And the only way that I'm going to compare it to Epstein is in terms of a lot of information. But in a way, the information that's coming out can also make people feel really helpless and really hopeless. Like, oh my God, what are we going to do? They've got this all set up for hundreds of years into the future. What can we do to stop us feeling that sense of hopelessness?
Well, I think that, we don't know our own power. And as I said, the people in West London got together and stopped all the nonsense in their vicinity. And the thing is that whilst we've still got our local councils, and it won't be for long because they're trying to bring devolution in and the covenant of smart city mayors and all that to be in control, we do at least at the moment have a way of going to our local councils, putting pressure on them. And the best way you can do that is form a residents association. And I've been speaking to the residents association in particularly in Merseyside. They've had massive wins against solar farms going up, wind farms going up, data centers going up, and also the legislation around houses of multiple occupation. So particularly with the data centers are these data storage centers, because digital ID requires data storage. if you can stop the planning applications for data centers, they've got a problem with digital ID because they can't store the data. So you can go to, form a residents association, National Residents Association. You don't have to call it that. You can call it whatever you like. And you can, so long as you've got a body of people going into your town council and saying, we oppose this data center going up. And they have to look at it, and they're stopping it. So, and there's also a wonderful crowd that I met in Southend when we were having the launch of Propaganda. We had a wonderful launch the other evening on Saturday, and there was another residents association that turned up from Southend, and they said, we're doing the same thing. We're stopping the data centers, and we can do it.
So it can be done like that at grassroots level. And obviously a lot of this is to do with kind of like the net zero agenda, really problematic in its own way. Now, I have a question. I don't know if you and I have ever discussed this before, and it's not an issue if you don't wish to, but Norky says, can you ask Sandy about geoengineering? Do you have a position on geoengineering, Sandy?
Well, yes, we know that the government have admitted that geoengineering is happening. It is it's a real problem. We can see it. We can see the lines in the skies. We can see them expanding. We can see the sun being blocked out. And we've seen a massive increase in rain, particularly in Somerset. Once again, the Environment Agency has decided not to dredge any of the Reens or the rivers, and it's flooding. And they're going to say, "Oh, it's climate change." It's not. It's the geoengineered rain. And it's, blocking out the sun. We need the sun for our vitamin D. We know it's happening. And there's plenty of stuff out there. We do know it's happening. And that is, I do understand that it's real. Absolutely.
And I'm really glad that you've been prepared to address it. Lots of people aren't. They're really worried that they get taken into the realms of being a conspiracy theorist. But it's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, we can not only, as you say, plainly see it, but they're even admitting to it now. I went to my local park yesterday. It was so flooded. I've had quite a lot of emails over the last couple of days about the sheer volume of rain and wet in the country. But as you say, it's geoengineered. Really important that we do tackle it. They leave drains blocked on purpose so they can blame climate change, says Shug. And none of that would surprise me. Glennie said, don't talk to me about rain. I live in Somerset. Got you. Absolutely got you. Sandy, it's always such a pleasure to catch up with you. Before you leave us today, last word to you.
Well, it's very difficult because we are, it's such a difficult time at the moment but also a very exciting time. I have to say, we're being hit with everything. We're playing whack-a-mole every day with all this stuff that's coming at us. And my parting words are, just never give up, never give in. Just keep going, because it's because of us that we're halting it. We're slowing it down, and they are having to think again about certain things. I mean, the inheritance tax thing with the farmers, it did get extended now to, I think it's, I can't remember how many million, maybe 2 or 3 million, I can't remember, but it needs to go. And the more we keep pressure on all of this stuff, on the data centers going up without our consent, the houses of multiple occupation, bypassing regulations, that's been addressed by Merseyside. All sorts of stuff. We can do it. We just need to have the time and the patience to do it, and to also believe that we can do it. That's the biggest thing. Yeah,
exactly. Which is why we cannot allow the potential hopelessness of any situation to eventually get us down, because as you quite rightly show, and honestly, I do truly believe that it's ultimately grassroots that is capable of stopping so much and highlighting so many injustices. In fact, my next two guests are absolute examples of that again. And Trevor Johns, who is obviously a colleague of yours and a friend of yours, says we are conspiracy realists. We
absolutely.
are indeed.
Thank you,
absolutely.
Trevor.
Yes, absolutely. Sandy, very much appreciate having you with us this morning. Thank you so much for all your sterling work.
It's been a pleasure.
I've already put a link, I think, in the description where people can find out more about you, including on your X account. And if I haven't, I will double check that at the end of the stream. Everybody, the rather remarkable Sandy Adams. Take good care of yourself, Sandy.
Thanks, Sonia, and thanks
Lovely.
for all you do. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Wonderful to have SANDI with us. So forthright, and I love that. And it's wonderful. Can I just say in the super chat, thank you so much, Mr. Prinsbeat. I very much appreciate that. And Kath Hutton, thank you to you as well. Before I bring in my next guest, I want to just go back to this very briefly and just muse on this because I didn't have an opportunity to properly. And that was, it's to do with the Epstein thing, right? And how that they then put out that information saying that it was actually known on the 9th of August that he was dead, whereas it was reported to the world that it was the 10th of August. And actually, so that was the official statement here. But what it actually reminded me of, and I often say this as somebody who has extensively researched the disappearance of Madeleine McCann and what it's actually really about, as opposed to the absolute madness that hits us on the daily, especially with the Epstein files coming out now. And people are like, it was the Podesta brothers. It's like, tell me you have never researched the Madeleine McCann case without telling me. And that's, you tell me the Podesta brothers did it. So they had this statement. But what was interesting, and I'm sure that many people who know the Madeleine McCann case will know what I'm about to talk about. And it was to do with when Madeleine McCann disappeared. And they'd actually reported on the CEOP website. The CEOP website is a website for missing people, primarily children. And Jim Gamble, a former RUC cop who became an absolute pusher of the Madeleine McCann was abducted narrative, he was leading CEOP, and CEOP had actually reported 3 days before she was missing that Madeleine McCann was missing. And it reminds me of a similar thing. And you have to wonder what happened, what took place to make that happen. Now, it could be a glitch in the system. Okay, we always have to allow for that. It could be a glitch in the system. That's not impossible. That is possible. But again, they're always interesting, isn't it? And you can't ignore anomalies like this, because once you start to get all of these kind of anomalies together, as my next guest will tell me about their research, that's when you start to get the true picture. So you can discount one thing. You can say, well, it was listed as the 9th of August because there was a problem with the system, or there was a problem with the data, or whatever. You can keep making those excuses, but sooner or later they stockpile into a hole. And that was what happened with me and Madeleine McCann. So once again, as I've said before, a lot of the roads tend to lead back to Madeleine McCann that I cover. And that is in part because Madeleine McCann, as many people know, is one of the UK's biggest cover-ups that implicates government and implicates very famous people. But every Prime Minister since Tony Blair onwards, and every Home Secretary is implicated in the cover-up of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. So I just wanted to say that. And again, of course, obviously they link very closely to the whole Epstein story as well. And that's right, Kira. I hear that. Very interesting, fun times. In the world of the blind, I've got that. Let's go that. The one-eyed man is king. And Randy said, Podesta's row is in the corner of my eye. Yeah, as long as they're just not in this story, because they don't need to be. And it really infuriates me, because that sort of stuff is a real distraction. And as I've said before, you don't need to embellish the story of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. It is crazy enough already. Talking about which, let's bring in our next guests. I am delighted that they are joining me today. This is such an important story. The story of 9/11, no doubt, has impacted us all, changed the way that we live. I mean, not just traveling, but changed our lives in so many respects. I'm sure many of us remember that day. I will never forget it. It's kind of etched in my mind. But let's bring in two people who know far more about it than I do. And I don't have a problem with that. First of all, Norman from 9/11 Revisionist. Thank you, Norman, for joining us today. Very much appreciate you joining us from South Africa. How are you?
I can't complain. Thank you for having me, Sonia. It's very, very nice speaking with you today.
Well, I'm very grateful for you to be here. And Patricia Kazaza, have I pronounced that correctly, Patricia?
Yes, you did fine. Thank you.
Right. Well, I did practice several times. I want you to know that, because I thought that the very least I can do is attempt to get this lady's name right after the sterling, incredible work she's done. I want to show a brief clip from a video to give people a background of you. You are, of course, one of the Jersey girls. You became very famous following 9/11, and not least because, well, you're a widow of 9/11, and you have done far more than most people have. We're going to talk so much today, including about this incredible book from Dr. Judy Wood and Thank you so much, Trev, one of my viewers who sent me that. Very much appreciate it. Fantastic book. And a lot of the conversation today, I think, is going to be revolving around Dr. Judy Wood. So let us, first of all, play this clip to give people a little bit of a background into Patricia and what a powerhouse she is.
These women banded together after their husbands were killed. And now they're leading a campaign to find out exactly how did 9/11 happen.
We are asking you, America, to stand behind us.
An investigation must not interfere with the ongoing efforts to prevent the next attack.
You know, our families didn't want us asking these questions. That was painful. We should, just be grieving and healing. Well, part of our healing process is finding out exactly what happened.
And you're absolutely right. Part of the healing process has to be finding out the truth of what really happened. And you have been absolutely dogged and determined to do this, both of you. Norman, absolute sterling work. And you never give up, Norman. You're extremely passionate about this. Tell us a little why.
Well, it's one of the biggest catalysts for changing the world and putting us basically where we are now. So much has been written, so much has been said about this, but after all these years, nobody's actually been taken into account. There are a lot of people out there claiming to be searching for the truth, but if you really do a little bit of research, you can see that what they are postulating to people isn't really that truthful. And that's one of the things that I've just been trying to have people see, that they can't really always trust anybody and everybody who goes out there and they've got a little soapbox on which they could stand. And then whilst I was writing my articles, then I saw a comment from Patricia, and I reached out to her to ask her whether or not we could have a conversation. We ended up having a very nice, long conversation about the last 24 years, what she's seen, what she's been through, going to DC and all of that. And that then spilled over to an open letter written towards Matthew Campbell in the UK, who's currently pushing the UK courts for a new investigation. And yeah, now we're just trying to have people find out more about her open letter.
And that conversation you had was a marathon one. I think it's over 5 hours, if I remember correctly. And really fascinating. Although there were on several occasions, Patricia, I found it incredibly emotional. I'm not quite sure how you managed to cope with a lot of this. And you, obviously, your husband, John, worked at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of Tower 1, the South Tower. You actually talked to him while this was happening, didn't you?
Yes. He had called me. I was in nursing school, and that Tuesday was a day off for me. And so I'm actually folding laundry, and my husband, John, called me to relay, he said, "Do you know what's going on?" He had a very panicked tone in his voice. And I said, "No, what's going on?" He says, "Turn on the television." So I ran and turned on the television, and I was like, "Oh my God." And he goes, at the time he thought perhaps a bomb had gone off in his building. He didn't know it was supposed planes that had hit his building. And the conversation really, it was tough. I mean, I still hear his sobs in my head. That he had told me that they had tried to find an exit that they could manage. I mean, these are all very young people in Cantor Fitzgerald. Most of the people that died that day were particularly young families.
Like 20s and 30s, weren't they?
Yeah, my husband was 38 at the time. So
yeah.
He told me, that the stairwells were ruined. They could not pass them. They tried. The elevators were gone, and the rooftop doors were locked. And the floor was filling up with a thick black, I would have thought it was smoke, but soot like from the explosions that had gone on in the building. And they were having trouble breathing, and he didn't think that they were going to make it. He knew at that time that they were not going to make it. So I was just started trying to comfort him, knowing that, he was a person of great faith. He was a guy who jumped out of bed at 7:00 on a Sunday morning, went to church. And so I went with that, and I said, John, you're a good man. And if anybody is ready at this moment in time, you are. You're such a good man. Everyone loves you. I love you. John, our son, loves you. And just, and then he just broke down sobbing, and just repeated over and over, I love you so much. And we carried on like that for a bit, and then I was going into shock. I could feel it all over my body. And at some point I lost the connection with him. He had called me from his office line. It was early days in the cell phones. And when someone went to the train station to recover his vehicle for me a few days later, that's when his cell phone was on the seat in the car. He had forgotten it that day. So I feel very blessed that I got that phone call. I mean, how often do you find and know for certain how much somebody loves you? They call you on their deathbed. Literally.
Oh, I mean, I feel quite shivery just hearing you talk. The pain that you've endured for a quarter of a century, and to see one whitewash, one cover up after another. You fought for the commission, and even within the commission, there were problems, weren't there? There were spies within the FBI, as one example. What
right.
Did we didn't get the truth from the 9/11 commission?
No, the person that revealed the spies to us, there was Sibel Edmonds. And it was us, the Jersey widows, who brought Sibel to the commission. These were early days in the commission, and we didn't tell them we were bringing her with us. And she relayed to them that there were spies in the FBI. She had joined the FBI after 9/11 to, offer her language services. She knew Farsi and the other languages in the Middle East, and was there to help with the backlog of translations that the FBI said that they had. And they were so backlogged, and yet there were individuals in the FBI in that office of translations that were trying to dissuade her from translating quickly, going through the material, trying to get her to avoid certain materials. And they were spies there, she said. And it's just unconscionable that this happened. And moreover, the reaction from the commission, we've talked mainly with Philip Zelikow. He was the executive director of the commission at the time. He was like the gatekeeper, who got interviewed, who didn't, what information they looked at. And basically we were told we could never bring somebody as a whistleblower to them, that they had to go through the proper channels. Well, the thing with the whistleblowers back in the day was they were not being subpoenaed. So without subpoenas, they didn't have whistleblower protections. And therefore, they were not coming forth.
Why would they? They were terrible. And it's all set up that way, isn't it? This is such
time and time again.
Absolutely. This is such an incredibly powerful open letter that you've written. And before I get to that and like break it down with you. Obviously, a great deal of it is around Dr. Judy Wood and to do with her theory, because, and Norman, this is what I want to come back to you, if I may, because obviously a lot of people believe that it's controlled demolition or there were explosives or thermite. That's not necessarily your understanding, is it? What do you believe happened?
Well, it doesn't really come down to a belief. Dr. Wood did a forensic investigation of the observable evidence. So when one goes into all the other narratives pertaining to bombs in the building, there could be certain type of such technologies being used. But when you look at the bulk of the evidence and all the anomalies around what happened and what was left of the buildings, you can only come to one conclusion, is that some sort of exotic black ops technology was used to turn those buildings into dust. Even the collapse speed or disintegration of the buildings going faster than gravity, you can't get that done with explosives. Then you have the problem of the 16 survivors in the North Tower between floors 2 and 22. Who did not hear any loud explosions going off. They weren't blinded by any bright light. They weren't burned by molten metal raining down upon them, because if you want to sever all the columns in one of the towers, you're going to need at least 29,000 metric tons of thermite. And if you watch any small little experiment with thermite being put off, they use like a small little cup like this, and it makes a huge fire show. So if you've got 29,000 metric tons of thermite in those buildings, you would have seen a second sun when those buildings unraveled, and that didn't happen. And then again, the amount of rubble, that is, you should have at least 12.5% of the original building height of rubble. That gives you around about 14 stories, which did not happen. It wasn't even 3 stories high. So a lot of people have never really looked at the pictures and everything, and that's what's so beautiful with Dr. Wood's book. It's 500 pages. As she explains everything to you, she's got the visual evidence there that you can work through. It's not a difficult book for people to read, but there was a concerted effort ever since she came out with her self-published book, where people attacked her ad hominem and dissuaded people from looking at it because it sounds so sci-fi, which actually, when you just investigate the evidence, it points you to a certain conclusion. And people are afraid of going there because they want to conceptualize everything into something that they can understand. And people should just go look at the evidence or watch Dr. Wood's 2012 Breakthrough Energy presentation that she did. It's 2 hours. And after that, you will have no doubt in the evidence that she presents and the conclusions that she makes from the evidence.
Now, this obviously very interesting, and you touch on a number of issues there. And I think, one, for some people, it seems too far-fetched, doesn't it? Like, some people now have managed to get their head around the idea there was an inside job, that it was a demolition involved. Some people have got that far, but anything else seems to take them too far through the Overton window. But not you, Patricia. You're not having it. And actually, it's really interesting because I think in many respects, it's so powerful that you've been prepared to get behind this. So let's start working through it, because you start your open letter by saying those seeking to uncover the whole truth about the events of September the 11th, 2001, particularly the destruction of the 7 World Trade Center buildings and the nearby Bankers Trust building, need to prioritize utilizing the most comprehensive examination of the mechanisms involved. That's your intro. Take it away. Tell us more.
I mean, there were, I go back to the personal in this, is there were 1,100 people never identified at the World Trade Center who died there. My husband being one of them. There was nothing left of him. He was totally obliterated. It's 1,100 other people. And then there were 400 other people who were only able to be identified by DNA means. And another 200 individuals were basically forced to jump to their certain deaths from 2 110-story buildings. en masse. I mean, that has never happened before in fires happening within buildings and that. My thoughts with that were, what was it that they were enduring at that time? What were they witnessing at that time that would have even forced them to do that? And I can only imagine that, you know, if the exotic weapons that Norman and I and Dr. Wood have ascribed to, you know, basically they were being microwaved and then with that dustified during that time. My husband had purchased for his desk these evacu hoods, so that in the event, because he had come to the building after 93, the 93 bombing, which we know was an FBI setup. Apparently the FBI had cajoled a few Muslim Arab individuals into bombing the buildings, but apparently they were supposed to substitute fake bombs. Well, lo and behold, real bombs were used. So I believe 93 was more or less a setup for what happened.
Oh, like a precursor to the
Yes,
event. Yes,
yes.
got you.
So when 9/11 happened, it was like, of course, they came back to finish the job. And that story has been repeated and repeated over these years, but it's only when you look at the evidence that was left behind, or the lack thereof, at Ground Zero and the subsequent cover-up. I mean, they have not even allowed for the toxin material information to be released. It took years for our government to acknowledge that people were getting sick down there from the toxins. They just, within the last few weeks, discovered 64 boxes or 68 boxes that were missing to, you know, establish that there indeed were toxins down there. The cover-up has just been massive. And, you know, to my way of thinking, I mean, it's like 25 years too late, basically, for this information to be getting out there.
And still being blocked, because
Yes.
I don't need to tell you, because you will both be on the receiving end of it. Whenever I cover this from the perspective of Dr. Judy Wood, I get quite a lot of abuse, because people are not, it seems too much for people, the idea of a direct energy weapon or any kind. Yes, go on, Patricia.
No, but we know that they used advanced secret weapons in Venezuela. We had President Trump bragging
Exactly.
about it.
Yes.
I mean, so it's open and notorious now. But when you step back from that and realize that it's been perhaps used on unwitting victims like my husband and 3,000 others, never mind the subsequent wars that came about with millions being killed, more troops died of suicide than actually were killed over in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it just goes on, and it's just such an overwhelming crime. It was a crime in and of itself back in the day. And we had to fight for over a year just to get an investigation going on 9/11. You were told we were unpatriotic for even asking for one. I mean, Mayor Giuliani at the time, we met with him, and his comment to us was, an investigation into 9/11 is none of your business.
Extraordinary.
And with that, his handler said, Mayor, I think it's time that we wrap this up, and agreed to disagree, and off he went.
That video, the part of the intro that I played after you've said what you say, there is then, and I don't know whether it's you or somebody else, but they're asked what question would they like to ask, and it was, where was Dick Cheney? I'm paraphrasing. Where was Dick Cheney on that day? Was that you, or
that was me? Yeah.
Why did you say that?
Because I believe that he was largely in control of what happened down there. He was down underneath the White House in the sub basements where they protect those in line to the presidency during an attack or something like that. And basically, he was conducting all the business that transpired that day. President Bush, as we know, was at a grammar school in Florida, reading to some children. And so he was, eventually left that building, which to my way of thinking, even on the day of was, well, aren't those kids a target then? If this is an attack on America,
right,
why wouldn't you go after the president at a known, function? And he sat there and continued on because he said he didn't want to scare the little kids. And I think you just, at that point in time, pardon yourself and say the president has, bigger things to attend to right now. And
yeah, very weird. It was the whole response was really weird.
The whole response,
absolutely weird. Norman, the problem is, if after 25 years we're still no closer to what you see as the actual truth, what hope is there? Because these people are still walking around. They're still existing on Earth, people who potentially know what took place. Is it a case of waiting for them to die before the truth can come out? Or will they do another Kennedy on us? And, you just have to wait and get it in piecemeal many, many decades later. What do you think?
I just think the thing what we need to do is just talk about this more often and keep on pushing. And it's also very strange for me to see how little of the alternative media talking heads like your Joe Rogans, Tucker Carlson's, all these people, how few of them have actually picked up on Patricia's open letter. It's not like I've not been sharing it in their comment sections and emailing them and all of this kind of stuff, but nobody wants to go there and touch it. And these exotic weapons have been talked about ever since the first recorded black op technology being used was in the Panama invasion of 1989, again with Desert Storm and with the Gulf War. So, and now Trump recently talking about it. We had that MIT professor who got taken out. He was doing research on cold fusion. Another gentleman who was part and parcel of the truth movement was Eugene Malov. He was also an MIT scientist working on cold fusion, and he exposed the cover-up of MIT on the cold fusion research as well. He ended up being beaten to death in front of his house. So it comes down to energy. A lot of people talk about the big pharma, big banks, big everything, but the one thing people don't talk about is big power, because as soon as we can not weaponize this exotic breakthrough energy that Catherine Austin Fitz also spoke about on Tucker Carlson's show, then the whole world will change. And that's what ended up happening on 9/11. It was a demonstration for the people in the know to see what they could do with this type of technology. And to me, it's also infuriating, and I struggle to understand why your so-called 9/11 truth movement would do anything to have you not realize this and not support Dr. Wood and the evidence that she presented and it's been going on since 2007. So a lot of people out there deem themselves truth seekers, but they're only comfortable with a certain point.
Yes,
exactly. And that's where we need people to break through, is to not just put themselves in these little boxes and think about everything that's available.
I see that changing, though. I see that the world is opening up to the potential to discuss it in a way that is potentially more appropriate. Let me, Colin Guthrie in the comments says, Sonia, I'm interested to know if Norman and Patricia think the planes were real. There are so many theories about holograms, or were they unmanned and remotely controlled? Any of you care to answer that, or both of you?
I believe that there were planes used that day, but as I say to, the other truth groups is, the transponders supposedly were shut off on some of these planes, and that reflects back to the air traffic controllers where they are in the sky. However, even if those transponders are shut off, the skin of a plane reports back to the air traffic controllers. Maybe not as consistently where they are. It may be a flash, along the pathway that says I'm still here. And apparently through the transmission, the ACARS data that is recorded from the plane to air traffic controller, that the planes that were supposedly used, flight 11, 175, 77, and 93, none of them hit their targets that day. So, maybe what we saw was a holographic hitting the buildings. As we know, these planes are aluminum and they're hitting these steel structures that with concrete and everything else. Normally you see in a plane accident, the plane everywhere, the parts everywhere. Well, I mean, what was found at ground zero, like there was an engine, well, it didn't even match the planes that were supposedly used that day. The NTSB was not even allowed at the site for the longest time and normally the NTSB, just like in Flight 800 that went down over Long Island, they match plane parts. They drug the ocean, underneath the ocean and brought the parts up and rebuilt the plane. We had none of that happening at ground zero. They basically took all the evidence away. At some point in time during the recovery, it didn't continue to be a recovery, and that means recovery of remains as well. They basically scooped everything up, put it in dump trucks, and brought my loved one over to a dump. And that's where they sifted and sorted for remains and parts and that. It was a removal of a crime scene.
Yes.
When in the history of any crime, and especially one of that magnitude, do you have something like that happening?
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, it was insane. And even while it was in recovery mode, they were throwing truckloads and truckloads of dirt over what was there and pouring water on it, supposedly that there were these fires. But yet, we had firefighters and rescue workers walking through. Nobody was being, as we like to say, boiled to death because of all the water that was poured down there. These fires weren't happening. The remains were being diluted, if you will, washed away. I mean, why would you do that?
Right.
In the middle of the largest terrorist, attack that has happened on U.S. soil.
Yeah. Well, there's a problem if you have to question the reaction and the response to the event that took place, which you've been forced to in great detail. Norman, what's your take? Were there planes on the day?
Well, there definitely planes did take off. They never ended up at the crash sites that they supposedly hit. So one can go back to the court case of Dr. Morgan Reynolds. He filed that in 2007 with an affidavit from John Lear. You can find it on his website, nomoregames.net, and I suggest everybody just go read through that because it makes the case for the impossibility for the planes to fly that low at those speeds and hit those targets. Also, there's more than enough research done by a gentleman with the name of Mark Conlon. He's in the UK. You can go read his Substack 9/11 planes research. He's gone into great depth with FOIA requests and all of that, where it's provable that the NTSB and FBI, they don't have any serial numbers that are linked back to the planes as well. So that was a big cover up. And an important thing is to remember that if there's planes or no planes or whatever, a aluminium can hitting a superstructure like that cannot cause what we saw on 9/11.
I mean,
And
that's
there's a
the
lot
very least that people need to accept, isn't it? That is the very least. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous Thank you, Norman. Patricia, going back to your letter, you say the lethality of what happened on 9/11 is nothing to trifle with, and settling for partial truths is truly at our peril. That's what we've been dealing with. And you talk about, both of you talk about, you know, people in the kind of 9/11 truther movement. I've interviewed Richard Gage as one example. Obviously, architects for 9/11 given much more airtime than Dr. Judy Wood, it has to be said, obviously. And I know that's not necessarily, I think you've confronted him, or at least you've had some issues, haven't you, Patricia, with what architects for 9/11 have been promoting?
Yeah, because I mean, they're going on, and yet they've said that they have uncovered thermite at ground zero in the dust. Well, there have also been others who have, looked at the dust and not seen thermite in the dust. So, and to my way of thinking is, if this was thermite, I mean, we would have seen it throughout all of the dust, considering, as Norman had said, it would have taken 29,000 metric tons in each building to take those buildings down via thermite. The other thing is, I've seen the injury list, and there aren't injuries of people being blinded by such a demolition. Then there was the firefighter chief battalion, Oreo Palmer. He had made it up into right at the impact zone. And he said, oh, we've got these low-level fires, 2 hoses is all, I need to put this out. But with that, almost, instantaneously after he finished that transmission, the building collapsed. I mean, he would be the first to say, oh my gosh, I'm seeing all of these detonation pieces here, wires and whatnot. I see the remains of undetonated things, what would be left behind. He's a fire battalion chief. If anybody would have known that there were not detonations in those buildings, he would have. And if those were his men in the building, he himself was in the building, he would have been the first to say, we've got a real problem here. Everybody needs to get out.
Right. Right. Yeah. Do you know, I have so much respect for what both of you are doing, because it's not easy. You're flying in the face of official narratives, which is never easy. And then you, Patricia, of course, have this incredible emotional attachment to the story as well, quite naturally. So what do you ultimately want from this open letter, Patricia?
Well, part of my impetus for doing that is there's a case over in the UK. This Matt Campbell is bringing it on behalf of his brother, Jeff, who was also killed in my husband's building. It was Tower 1, the first building hit. And he did have remains. I don't have any remains. And, his whole case is based upon what Richard Gage has presented as in the thermite argument. And, there's all this evidence that thermite wasn't used. And I was trying to convey to him to please reconsider the type of evidence that you're using. Look at what Dr. Judy Wood has proposed, because we can't have these weapons being used on unwilling victims. Otherwise we continue that abuse, and it will be perhaps used again. I think they have been used again, as we said, in Venezuela and perhaps other places. And at some point in time, we all become unwitting or unwilling participants as well, if we allow that to continue.
It's like we're complicit.
Yes.
I mean, and that's why I really object. I'm sure, Norman, you can relate to that as well. We can't be complicit in these cover-ups. Norman, what do you say?
No, you've got to expose the limited hangouts. There's enough people who've pointed out some of the shortcomings in the various other counter narratives, and then also the ad hominems thrown at Dr. Wood with this space beams and all of this kind of stuff. She's never mentioned that. And you'll find that 99% of the people who are critical to what she presents have never watched a presentation and have never read her book. And how could somebody want to have an opinion of something that they've never investigated? And
Right.
that's my problem. If you want to call yourself a truth seeker, you've got to look at everything out there and then make up your own mind, and still be willing to change your mind when presented with more solid, credible evidence. And that is something that's lacking with people calling themselves truth seekers. And I think a lot of people are more conspiracy-tainment consumers than real truth seekers, because they find a narrative that they think is nice and they clamor to that without even thinking about what's being presented to them.
Right, exactly what I was saying when you were waiting to be brought in, when I was talking about the Madeleine McCann situation, is people feel the need to embellish it and create stories when actually the truth is problematic enough. And it's exactly the same when you have these big, huge world narratives, then we need to get it right. So let me just read you this, and then I'd like to finish with you, Patricia, if I may. Mel says, if we give our energy to stories like this instead of distractions, we will get somewhere. And that is the reality, is we are bombarded on the daily. We're divided up. Oh, you think this about this MP and about this politician. We're constantly divided. We never get a chance. And if we're not divided, you've got people saying, well, what about? We never seem to drill down and get to what the real issues are. And I feel that that's what both of you are doing, which is tremendous work. Norman, great respect for what you do. You're always welcome on the show. And Patricia, yourself, of course, I'd like to finish with you, Patricia, simply because it's so personal. What would you like to be a kind of take home message for people?
I always say I'm 64 years old. This is not about me. This is about future generations. And I think the complex and harsh truths of 9/11 need to be revealed, so we don't allow those powers that be to do this in our names going forward in the future. We have to try and stop them from doing this and carrying out these attacks, on other unwitting and unwilling victims. My husband just went to work that day. He was not wearing a uniform in the military. He was not overseas. This happened right in our backyard here in the United States. And we have had the biggest cover up, the least amount of information. I always say if my husband had been killed in a car accident, I'd have more information than what has transpired over the last 25 years. And I said, it's 25 years. It's too late for more excuses. And that's why I always say we need the whole truth. I read a sign on a church lawn at some point in time, and it just epitomized for me what's going on with the 9/11 truth movement. And it's like the sign said, a half truth is still a whole lie, and we just are not getting the truth with these various groups. And that in and of itself is just more of a cover up. These people need to, if they have the intellectual humility and they're honest, they're not trying to continue a cottage industry on the backs of my husband's death.
Right.
Then relinquish your role and say, I think that there's something else going on here. We have more evidence. We need to look at it. And I am open to wherever that evidence leads. But that's not what's happening. I'm still hopeful that, they'll have an epiphany and realize, if it could be used on someone like me and my husband, my family got destroyed, it can be used on anyone.
Absolutely, it can. Marco says, these are two incredible guests, such a good conversation. And the thing is each one teach one, right? There may be somebody listening to this today who had never considered what you're talking about right now. And I think eventually, that the truth becomes so overwhelming, lies fall away, whatever the narrative is, lies fall away. And that appears to be happening with this. The stuff that you're talking about would have been for some people and just impossible to consider, even perhaps a year ago. And now I think more people are waking up to that. I want to thank you both for joining us. I know, Patricia, it's God, horrendous time in US at the moment. What is it, like 5:45 in the morning or something?
Yes.
Bless your heart. And Norman, of course, you're in South Africa. I don't know what time it is there. You're pretty aligned with the UK, aren't you, in terms of time?
Yeah, we're basically two hours ahead of you at the moment with your daylight saving time. So it's
Well,
1:45 in the afternoon.
I appreciate you both very much for joining us this
Thank
morning.
you.
I think this has been such an illuminating conversation. Everybody, this is Norman, 9/11 revisionist. I think I've already put a link in the description. If I haven't, I will do at the end of the stream. And Patricia Kazaza, and well, you've heard what Patricia has to say, really kind of heart-touching stuff. And it's time for the truth. If there's ever been a time for the truth, 2026 is it. Take good care of yourself, both of you. I appreciate you greatly for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And very clear, both very, very clear, and painful to have to talk about something like that when you've been through it on such a personal level. Trauma-based mind control. Bless you, Patricia, says Cosmic. Thank you, Patricia, says Moody Purple. And thank you, Patricia and Norman. Keep seeking the truth. As long as they are powerful, it will continue. What was that? Most dead were first responders. Yes. And then males, we had 7/7 afterwards. Absolutely, we did. And anybody who knew that it was just a reoccurrence of what we had just seen in the US. So yeah, all powerful stuff. Right. Anybody, let's move on. I want to talk. I need to bring in some imagery. So just bear with me a second. Did anybody see the Lucy Letby documentary on Netflix? Well, I watched it, so you don't have to. And I'm sure many people have watched it now. Let me just take these out. I always feel better when they come out. And this is an image of Lucy being arrested. It's absolutely heartbreaking stuff. And essentially, the documentary is pretty much everything that you will have seen before, except the footage. Now, the footage we haven't seen before, and the footage is of several arrests that she had to endure. And it's pretty horrendous stuff. And it's horrendous stuff because I think it is so incredibly intrusive. And I think that there is no editorial justification for some of the footage. This is Lucy, who wants to say goodbye to her cat. And I think that in many respects, this documentary will backfire on them. And when I say them, I'm talking Cheshire Police, who supplied this incredibly intrusive imagery and footage, and ITM Productions, who I worked for 8 years, and they are absolutely the news corporation who specialize in official narratives. And then, of course, Netflix. So all three of them, an unholy trinity, have come together to ensure that the world at large still believes that Lucy Letby killed 9 babies and was responsible for the attempted murder, 7 babies rather, and was responsible for the attempted murder of a further 7. And so this is Lucy, where she wants to say goodbye to her cat. And it's like, immediately you're like, isn't the idea that she's some kind of cold-blooded killer? And she's clearly not. And that's why I think a lot of it will backfire. But also I think it's going to backfire because when you actually watch it, you realize they've convicted her on so very little. It's all circumstantial. Nobody witnessed anything. They have no CCTV to say that she did these things that they've accused her of. And so when you watch it, you're like, heck, they could just bring together, 5 or 6 different factors and make me responsible for these heinous crimes as well. And what you actually had were all these cops from Cheshire Police getting their 15 minutes. And that included Paul Hughes, detective superintendent, Danielle Stonier, who's a detective sergeant. There were several others as well. And it was absolutely clear how overzealous they were and determined that Lucy Letby was the woman that they believed her to be. And we saw all the other stuff that we've essentially demystified demystified on Wake Up, including things like the confession notes, about how they'd found these confession notes where it said, I killed them, I'm evil, I did this, I don't deserve to live. And they took that as her meaning it, rather than her carrying out an exercise that she was asked to carry out. And also it did reveal how problematic her actual defense was, not least because the defense didn't call any expert witnesses. She was deeply failed in court by her legal team. Shockingly bad defense. The prosecution was flawed, but there was no pushback against it. If they'd have had experts saying, no, these things aren't possible, this isn't how it worked, it could have been a whole different series of events. But in 2024, Mark MacDonald, a barrister, started to dig into her case, had some real concerns about it, and he ended up talking with Dr. David Bull on Talk TV, and that led to Lucy Letby's parents contacting him, and he was deeply concerned. No CCTV, no motive, none of these things. And some of this documentary is really heart-wrenching. She comes over to me as extremely vulnerable. I also, and I don't know if anybody's discussed this before, but there was something about her that made me think she may well be on the autistic spectrum. And they were talking about how she was just so matter of fact, and a lot of her tone was really flat. And I just thought, I wonder if she is autistic, or at least on the spectrum. But some of it, there is no justification for whatsoever. And I talk, of course, as I say, about the invasive footage. So they go into her house, and I think on the first arrest, the cop says, yeah, I've got a body worn camera. And you get a sense that they had planned this all out, right? That even when they were going in to arrest her on the first occasions, that they knew that this was going to play out into something bigger. And when she tells Lucy about the body worn camera, I was there going, yeah, and also tell her how you're going to flog the footage to Netflix later on as well. And because it felt like it was all kind of like predetermined in some respects. And I don't doubt that police and media work together. I've worked together with loads of cops, and it can be very, very useful. You can get intel and insight in a way that you can't in other situations. So it can be very useful, and it can also be an issue of public interest, and it can benefit the public as well when police and media work together. This isn't one of those occasions. This is about the police wanting to be absolutely proven right. And bear in mind, recently they tried to get more charges against Lucy Letby and failed on that. And of course, the pushback against Lucy Letby's convictions are immense right now, because the CCRC, the Criminal Case Review Commission, is currently considering whether to send her case back to the Court of Appeal. Some people are saying that now there's so much doubt that it absolutely warrants a retrial. And then when you start to trace, as I say, the overall impression was one, I don't think actually the documentary makers have done themselves any favors. Cheshire Police certainly have not. Absolutely, they have not. They've not covered themselves in any glory whatsoever. And they retrace things like when they started to investigate that unit. And there's so much missing from it. There's so much missing from it, including all the issues that were going on with the National Health Service at the time, and how David Cameron and George Osborne were depleting the National Health Service. And there was an increase in deaths all around the UK around that time. But they don't really tackle anything like that, because it's all about making the viewer be absolutely convinced that they got the right girl. And as I say, horrible invasive footage, including going into her house. You can hear her mum screaming. I don't think I'll ever erase the sound of Lucy Letby's mum's scream. And it's really like on a gut level. And any parent who has been in any situation, that is absolutely devastating for them to do with their child. I'm sure somebody like a Fiona Donohoe would be able to relate to it, because it's a form of grief. And you could hear Lucy Letby's mum's scream, and none of that needed to be in the documentary. None of it. That is voyeuristic pulp. It's horrible, really horrible stuff. Now, the only thing that I struggled to actually be able to kind of justify or work out an answer for was the handover medical record sheets that they talked about. But I'm sure that somebody who knows the case better than I do will either respond in the comments and put me right about this, or will write to me afterwards and enable me to be able to tackle this again on next Monday's show. But there were these handover medical record sheets And there were about 250 of them, and she had them in a folder, and they said that she'd come home with them by accident, not deliberate. And she said she didn't have a shredder, but evidence showed she did. This was weird, and I don't know what to make of it, actually. It was all filed, and some of it pertained to some of the babies who had died. Oh, wait, Cheryl. And now this is what I need, is somebody who actually knows this. Right, Cheryl says, I have taken handover notes home before by accident. It's not unusual. Okay. Blue Nomad says, if she is released, could she ever work in hospitals again? Almost certainly not. And not necessarily because she's guilty, but just because her reputation is absolutely destroyed. And Kira said, you would carry them in your pockets and bring them home. Okay, I get that. But I suppose what confused me was how she had filed them all really neatly. But again, it goes back to this thing of, it's possible she's on some kind of spectrum. And I think that's possible when she was looking up on Facebook some of the children some of the babies who were sick or who were dying or whatever. Because I actually think, unlike the way that they've portrayed her, I actually think she's a compassionate individual. She came over as compassionate in that she was deeply concerned about the level of anguish this was causing her parents. She was deeply concerned that she would have to leave her cat. And not for a second did I believe any of this to be an act. None of it whatsoever. Her mum's stricken sobs in their own home simply cannot be justified for public consumption. It's pretty awful stuff. Dr. Dowie Evans was also there, significant contributor, very highly problematic individual. There were other aspects of it that I found problematic. One of them was what they did was they used digital images throughout. It looked cartoonish. It was really, really weird. It was theatrical. It felt like a big performance. It felt completely inappropriate for the subject matter. It was very Hollywood. It's a Hollywood production. And as I said, they use these digital images of people speaking, including parents of children who had died. And it's really painful stuff. At one stage, when they're having the press conference with Dr. Shuley and David Davis, and they're presenting an alternative to the prosecution against her, and they do provocative things like they show the mother of one of the children, David Davis, saying something like, I can't remember his exact words, it's like the star of the show, or words to that effect. And they didn't need to do that. People say uncomfortable, awkward stuff like that in introducing people. I've described people before who are wonderful, and I don't think they're wonderful. You say awkward things sometimes, right, in introducing, and you don't necessarily mean to do it, but they use that, and they were like, how do you feel about that? And it's all designed to get an emotive response out of the parents. So and also they used her friend throughout, and again, it was digital images that they used of her, really weird AI stuff, very odd. I understand about the parents because obviously the babies they are anonymous. And so the parents are as well. But I just felt the way that they had used it, the digital imagery, it looked too theatrical, and I wasn't comfortable with it at all. And I also felt that featuring her friend throughout felt a bit weak. Don't get me wrong. It's really important to have somebody from her history saying this is who she was. She was targeted from the get-go at Cheshire. They already ostracized her. I didn't even want to work there at Chester Hospital, rather. I didn't even want to work there. And so she sets a really good scene, but they essentially use her as the main thrust back against all of Cheshire Police. There's like 4 of them, I think, who appear. I think 1 female, 3 men. I think that's roughly it. And so they use that, and in its own way, it kind of lacks credibility because it feels too personal. And then they have a segment with her new barrister and some comments from Dr. Shuley. But essentially, it finishes with absolutely them convincing you that Lucy Letby is responsible for those baby deaths and the attempted murder of those babies. And I think that there should be serious complaints made about this, because whatever you think about Lucy Letby, since when are we starting to punish parents for the sins of their children? It's not acceptable. And her parents came out before the show, so they already knew. Her parents came out and said about this very, very private footage that was going to be made public all over the world. They said it will kill us, but it didn't stop ITN, it didn't stop Netflix, and it didn't stop Cheshire Police. And I just think that the whole thing, quite unintentionally, Cheshire Police, ITN and Netflix, they ended up creating a situation where it's likely more people will believe Lucy Letby is innocent. Because, as I say, rather than witnessing a cold-blooded and calculated killer, they captured these scenes as horribly voyeuristic as they were, and we shouldn't be privy to them. But nonetheless, they revealed a more human side to the woman who has been convicted of being a mass murderer. And I think this documentary will ultimately backfire, because what we saw actually was an empathetic and compassionate human being. And so the police have got their 15 minutes of fame. I'm sure they're very happy. The whole thing was overzealous and actually reflects very badly on the police. Indeed, it also reflects very badly on ITM Productions, but nothing surprises me there, because, as I say, I worked for them for 8 years. I was a consulting and contributing editor, and my job was actually to bring in stories that weren't being covered in the mainstream. And I brought in stories like the contaminated blood scandal as one example. But for the most part, ITN is very, very much about highly polished productions, but solidifying narratives. And dehumanization across the hypnotized nations, says Kerry. Is that true, Cheryl? I don't know that. But very interesting stuff. That's interesting comment there, Kira. Miri AF theory is Lucy Letby wrongful conviction will lead to jury-less trials. Now, I don't always agree with everything Miri says. I definitely don't agree with her Madeleine McCann theories, but she does have some interesting theories. And that I couldn't rule that one out, actually, about how, because they've already want to do juryless trials anyway, don't they? The media are all parasites, says Mary. I hope present company accepted on that, Mary. Yes, ITN is really the same as the BBC, Stephen. That's the reality of it. It just doesn't have that same kind of level of attack. But it should have, because the ITN actually supplies news to 3 channels, ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. So out of the 5 terrestrial channels we have in the UK, 3 of them are all supplied by the same news vendor. Thank you, Mary. Yes, please, Cheryl, send me that article, Sonia Poulton at sky.com. Very much. I want to see that. I want to see that. Thank you. And if I'm supposed to save me watching it, you're welcome, Synchronized Soul. That's right. I watched it so you don't have to. So there you go. So yeah, Lucy Letby, Netflix documentary. I think that what they set out to do is what they will ultimately fail at. And the only thing that sets it apart is the footage. And without it, the documentary would fall flat. This was using the footage was not just about, saying we got it and the Cheshire police getting their kind of 15 minutes. But this was a commercial decision. They realized they could make more money. And whatever they set out to do, which appears to be quite negative and nefarious, it will backfire on them. Of that, I'm in no doubt whatsoever. It's not news, just programming. At this point, can anyone ever listen or give the time of day to anything mainstream? Says Mugician. Is that Mugician, Will? You people kill me with your names on there. Right. So that's my review of it. So, and as I say, I watched it, so you really don't have to. And in fact, I think it would be best that at least people watch it as possible and show them that we don't have an appetite for this kind of stuff. It could have been much more probing, and it really failed to do that. As I say, it didn't look at the big context. There was so much that it failed to do. Just to say, there's loads of stuff that I want to cover over the next few weeks. And I think that one of the things that there's definitely kind of like a thread running through is the whole idea of people who started to make films to do with child trafficking, and then they died, and apparently at their own hands. And that includes, for example, Avicii. Now, Marlena, who's regularly in the chat and is a great supporter of Wake Up, she'd suggested to me a while ago for me to look into the death of Avicii. He's a German producer. And she said it's really weird. And first of all, I couldn't really find anything to do with it. And it was, although I'd seen a Netflix documentary about Avicii. Thank you, Cheryl. I'd seen a Netflix documentary about Avicii, and it was really sad. And he appeared to be a really sensitive individual. But I didn't necessarily think there was anything untoward attached to it, but Marlena wasn't having it and sent me information. And then I actually ended up having several conversations with music industry friends, and they were like, nobody that they knew was comfortable with Avicii's death. And so I want to start looking into that. And it is highly likely that there are a number of people, and I won't necessarily do this as a feature together, but I definitely want to look into the death of Avicii. I've looked into the death of Anthony Bourdain, but not necessarily in this context. But there were others who were all working on a documentary, possibly together, to do with child trafficking. And that includes Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington. So what is it that links them? He's Swedish, the Blue Nomad. Thank you for covering this. Avicii's death is sus, says Marco. No problem. I will do it. Absolutely. So I'll share it to the music biz. No way he finished himself. That Netflix doc was total psyop, says Sasha. Sasha, you could be talking about the Lucy Letby doc, or pretty much any of their docs, actually. So yes, absolutely. I will be covering that in future weeks. Now, let me get to your shout. Very interesting email from Michael Ginsberg, founder and editor of Actionable Truth Media. He said that, talk to me about the age verification of Substack. Now, a lot of people use Substack because they see it as an alternative way to get their work out. I didn't know about an age verification. He said, I may have missed this, but I don't remember you covering on your show the introduction of age verification by Substack, despite never being ordered by Ofcom or the Australian authorities to do so. Really odd stuff, right? And he's written an excellent piece. I'll put a link in the description about it. And it is a long read. It covers everything about the topic. And it talks about the publishers, the readers on Substack. And I said, no, I didn't know about that. Why would they do that? That's really curious, given it's supposed to be this alternative home and they're not being ordered to do it. And then he responded saying the rabbit hole gets deeper. And he talks about the people involved with Substack and how they're also mentioned in a 2030 Epstein conversation with Ayad Barak, well, the Israeli prime minister who Virginia Giuffre said was one of her abusers. So that's really interesting, of course. And Michael says, I am now of the opinion, based on pattern recognition, that Substack was created to be a honeypot for dissidents, writers, and dissident content creators in general. What a thought. I mean, we have to allow for this. We have to allow for the fact that this is highly possible. Absolutely, it is. Thank you. I very much appreciate that, Michael. Thank you. And Man Bear Pig says, stop transing people. It is not true. What's not true? What, that they've got age verification? Is that not true? What's going on? I don't know what's going on. Russell Simmons, I know, well, I say I know. I've met him several times. I went to his flat. He actually did me a solid favor once when I was working at Kiss FM, and it had just been given its broadcast license, and we needed a big name for a Christmas special, and I went to him and he appeared. So, but I've heard lots of things about him, Bass Driver, lots of things. And I want to get on to a email from Bill. Good morning to you, Bill. Bill's a big fan of John Hendon, our psychotherapist. And after John was on with us last Monday, Bill decided that he wanted to buy one of John's great books. And he said that after yesterday's interview with him, I finally got around to buying his book from Amazon. However, prior to this, I had checked out an eBay listing, which was cheaper, but the donate to charity link on the page made me run. It was truly shocking. You're not going to believe. For John Hendon, who is very aware of what's going on, right? It was only the Mermaids charity that they were trying to get money for from John Hendon's book. Outrageous stuff. So thankfully, Bill wrote and told me about that. And John was outraged, as you can imagine, said, I've investigated Bill's complaint about my eBay listing, and he's absolutely right. I am appalled too. I've written the following complaint to eBay customer services. And John went into some detail about the problems with Mermaids, about how they support trans, non-binary and gender questioning children and young people. And that's what they set out to do. And John points out, for the record, Mermaids provided chest binders to young people, including minors, sometimes without parental consent. The charity supported young people in changing names or presentation without adequate oversight. And John just goes off on one to eBay. We're waiting to hear how they're going to respond to that. But John absolutely does not support anybody buying his book and giving charity donations to Mermaids. Outrageous stuff. Oh, Bill, that's you. Hello, Bill. Bill's in the comments. Monopods, thanks. Wonderful. Well, thank you for raising awareness to that, Bill. Very much appreciate it. As you can imagine, John Hendon, a brilliant, brilliant man, not having it at all. So I will let you know what eBay have to say about that. This is an interesting story. Claire wrote in, said, I've heard a very odd story from a friend. She is on PIP and has various prescriptions. She uses the same doctor's surgery as me, so she thought I would be interested. She had a phone appointment with one of the doctors. She is very chatty. The doctor told her he was going to be her dedicated doctor, but he was unsure for how long for. Confused, she asked him why, and he told her that he thought he was going to be replaced by AI. Not understanding, she asked him to explain. He said that the next day he was having his face scanned and was giving a sample of his voice. So Claire says, so I wonder, here we are with both political houses debating how to murder the population, about how it will be authorized. Well, no better than a GP with a long history with a patient. Will your GP's avatar put you forward? And would the patient know it was AI over Zoom? And if you did spot it as AI, would anyone believe you? Well, exactly. Absolutely. Outrageous stuff. And Claire said, I think the population needs to know about this and perhaps stop the use of the familiar GP's faces being used. Well, doctors also have to fight back. I mean, the human body, even though there's kind of like recognized patterns of what can make us sick, but the human body is still very individualistic. Don't look at the programmer behind the curtain, says Kerry. I've got you. AI could be our biggest downfall, says Stephen. It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous stuff. I'm going to be contacting my own doctor's surgery about this, and I want reassurance that none of my doctors are suddenly going to morph into AI. AI couldn't be any worse. That's the truth. Greg wants to know if AI is being trained to write intelligible prescriptions. Who knows? Who knows? Thank you so much to your response to my Bono deep dive. Very much appreciated. I ended up bawling my head off reading some of the comments. There was one lady who'd had a stroke. She'd used to watch me before she had a stroke, and she's still watching me now, and I send my love to you. And there was also somebody called Why Were Gryrion. And I want to read this. I burst into tears when I read this. Said, Sonia, I lost my dad on New Year's Eve. He was a big fan of yours, as am I. Thank you. I appreciate that. He despised Bono, or Bonehead as he called him. He would have loved this episode. Brilliant work as always. I really appreciate that. Lots of love to you. Lots of love to you. It kind of warms my heart when I hear that there are generations in families who have watched my work. Thank you. Or read my work. Really appreciate that very much. And as I say, lots of love to you. And finally, Anton from Sweden. We have people from all over the world. It's 11 people. Thank you, Fun Times Forever. And Anton from Sweden wrote in saying, your conversation with Oliver Cowmeadow made me want to share a recent experience. Oliver Cowmeadow, of course, brilliant man, and formed the school, the macrobiotic school in Devon, and has given away a number of places to their courses to our viewers. Very kind, generous individual. And Anton wrote about the conversation with Oliver Cowmeadow. I used to suffer from light sensitivity induced headaches and eye strain, but don't anymore after having quit alcohol. I was a normal consumer, but quit entirely 3 months ago. After about 1 month, my light sensitivity started easing, and now it's almost completely gone. I hope this was of interest, and perhaps it could inspire you and your viewers to try quitting alcohol, see what positive effects it might have. And Anton loves our show, which is great. I very much appreciate it. And I wonder how much alcohol you need to be having for it to have some kind of impact. Maybe I should do some kind of experiment there. Thank you, Dilip. Pack show today. Fabulous as usual. Thank you, Humphrey. I very much appreciate it. Next thing to say to you is I'm currently investigating the charity con. This was suggested by Ray J, one of our chatters, a few weeks ago. Very interesting. And I'm very interested to hear from you, not necessarily in the live chat, because I sometimes miss some of the live chat messages, but I'm very interested to hear from you, your least favorite charities. It can be from anywhere in the world. My personal least favorite happened to be Cancer Research UK and actually Mermaids. And I want to really delve deeply into the whole kind of con of charitable concerns. We know what they're used for, and probably look at kind of like the top 10 worst charities in the world. You're welcome. You're very welcome, people. So please do let me know, and feel free to write to me at soniapoulton@sky.com. Dell said, no one mentioned all the special people who were told not to come into work on 9/11. Got you, Dell. The problem is that 9/11 is such a huge subject, such a massive subject. We only had about half hour to cover it. And anything longer than that will just lose interest for a lot of my viewers. But I take your point. Oh, base driver, UNICEF, Save the Children, the Red Cross, Comic Relief, Children in Need. There's a lot to be going on with. Yes, fun times forever. That sounds good. I like to give my charity, and I do give it direct to poor people in my community because organizations are not always good. Do you agree with them, Lisa? Thank you. And thank you as ever to my wonderful donators. Thank you to Magsy, who left a super chat or a super sticker on the Bono video. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Lunis471, also for your super chat. And thank you to Catherine Montgomery, Ashley Potter, Stuart Reynolds, Ross Bangs, Ian Jones, and F. Young. And I want to end on a viewer's email from Kerenza, and let me read it to you. Dear Sonia, I wondered if you have any of your sage advice. I'll give it my best shot. I'm feeling so many emotions, but mostly I feel really flat. I had this feeling all my life that people just wanted to look away from child abuse, but I always had this grain of hope that maybe people just didn't believe what I was saying. That if people could only see what I knew, then they would really hold their babies close and protect them, that there would be a massive change and society would be changed to protect the most vulnerable and not to aid the abusers. Now the world can see. The files have come out, the evidence is there to see, and nothing. Crickets. I'd say I'm gobsmacked, but unfortunately, this is a dance I know all too well. People will see and they will just carry on and pretend they didn't see it. There might be some exclamation of how terrible, but they'll still somehow pretend it doesn't apply to them in their life. I keep waiting for the public anger, for the outrage, for the sorrow for the survivors that weren't believed, for the remorse for the children society failed to keep safe. I keep waiting for the change, but will it come? If not now, in the face of all this, I wonder how you cope, not only as an individual, but also as a parent. It's hard to digest the truth as a parent. How did you teach your daughter in an age-appropriate way? What did you do to feel supported as a parent when all of our institutions aren't fit for purpose and child safety is a document in a file and not something more meaningful? Even if you don't get to my email, the end of your show always gives me hope. So thank you for all that you do. And for that, some weeks it really gets me through and spurs me on to keep hope. And that is from Kerenza. And I've read it in its entirety because I think it's really important to. I think there is a sense of like we are bombarded with all this information, but where is it really going? And I'm not sure if I have any solutions because I also feel the same unhappiness at the lack of action. The world did not believe the voices of 1,000 survivors. Many females have come out saying I was abused, the Jeffrey Epstein files as one example, and the world didn't believe it. And it took the release of these documents for the world to wake up. So I absolutely get you. And what I said to an editor actually at ITN back in 2012, I think is still valid. I said at the time, when she and I were talking about the issue of child abuse within the British establishment, and I said the UK is simply not ready to hear all the facts. And it turns out the world isn't either. That's why we get so much piecemeal. And some of it is so dark, it's hard for people to process. That's one of the reasons. But I actually do see hope, Kerenza. People in my street and in the park and in my local shops who know what I do for a living suddenly are having conversations with me about child abuse and trafficking. That's never happened, but now it is. Even just over a week ago, people weren't having those conversations with me. And I've had probably about 5 or 6 conversations in this last week from people in my local area who, as I say, know what I do and have never been interested in discussing it further with me. So I think that is making a change, and that can have a positive change. And Kerenza, this feels so personal to you. So I'm sure that it touches you very deeply. And so there's no point in me trotting out kind of, well-worn cliches, because this involves involves some of the most vulnerable in our society, our young, and what we get is the rich and the powerful and protected men primarily, once again, being protected. And so I think the message I want to share is we are not at the end of the tunnel, but we are further along than we were even a week ago. Don't give up. Try not to despair. There is progress, albeit slow. Justice, sadly, is too late for some, including Virginia Giuffre. But I just thought if I could just give some pointers about how to maintain hope when hope seems to be evaporating, then that's what I should do. And some pointers include focus on small actions when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel that nothing is going to change. Okay. Look at the small actions that have taken place that take us in kind of like to the way of the truth. And also practice gratitude for that information coming out as well, because they tried to stop it. They've done everything they could to stop it. So I think some gratitude, but also to be aware on a realistic level that they've been through those files. They've put out what they wanted to. They've redacted what they want to. We're still not seeing it also, but enough to say practice gratitude for at least us seeing some, because some people have woken up. And I would also say, in order to keep your hope, find out your why. Why does this matter so much to you? And what can you do in your own corner about it? And also be prepared to accept the negative emotions that may overwhelm you. Acknowledging feelings rather than, forcing yourself to feel positive is a good thing. You don't need to suppress your emotions, Kerenza, and nobody does either. It's really important. Mel sees misreporting of the files and AI being used to muddy the waters. I'm guessing at some point some will say the files aren't true. I hear you. I saw a thing to do with Nigel Farage. There's no evidence that he's ever met Epstein, but there's pictures going around. And I'm no fan of Nigel Farage, but clearly Epstein was a fan of Nigel Farage, but there's no evidence they've actually met, but there are images going around. So yeah, that's fake news as far as I can understand. And Glennis said, Virginia has helped people see the truth. God bless her soul. And also, Kerenza, do everything you can to engage in joyful activities when that kind of feeling starts to overwhelm you, okay? And believe in a future, believe in a better future. There is. And I think very importantly, please, please, please practice self-compassion. So vital. Be kind to yourself. When you feel that, the world just is on your shoulders, be kind to yourself. And so those are and also really important, in order to feel in control, focus on what you can control. Identify the areas of your life where you have agency and focus your energy there. And it may be a case that you might still need to dig deep and find out why this is impacting you so deeply. And don't get me wrong, we should all be impacted by this. Child trafficking, child abuse, we should all be impacted by it. And so few actually are. And so you're a good soul, obviously, but you don't want to hurt yourself in the process. Thank you, Healing Guidance. Thank you so much. When all is chaos on the outside, it is time to go within, says Reba. What a beautiful comment. And of course, as ever, thank you to my wonderful donators, contributors, and patrons. I appreciate you so very much. Thank you, Colin. And as ever, people, I like to finish on a quote, and I'm going to, and that is, never give up, for that is just the place and time that the tide often turns. You take good care of yourself. I will see you on Friday. No idea what I'm doing on Friday. Quite often I wait to see if there's some kind of news to shift me into gear, to inspire me what it's going to be. I've no idea what it will be. I've literally no idea. But if you have some suggestions, feel free to drop a line at soniapoulton@sky.com. And it can be an investigation into anything of public interest. It doesn't have to be a dark side of it. It can be literally an investigation into anything that impacts the public. And thank you all, you beautiful people. And Caroline says, Epsom salt in a bath does knock off the outside energies picked up. I love that. Wonderful. Thank you, Shannon. And Kira thought today was Friday. It's heavy. Go dance, people. Yes, that's right. Absolutely. Dancing is a wonderful tonic. Couldn't agree more. Do something different. Your power is the tribe, says Randy. And Mel says, never give up on a good thing. Remember what makes you happy. Thank you, Monopods. Absolutely. I agree with you. Take good care of yourself, everybody. Lots of love, and I'll see you Friday.